Good afternoon. I won't talk about a specific geodesign project, but what I want to talk about is challenges that we see planners are facing in the field when it comes to planning for an uncertain future in an accelerating world. And we have a feeling that geodesign might play a really important role in finding some solutions for these challenges. Just like Ryan and many other people here too, I like word clouds. This specific word cloud gives you some drivers or external forces of change that we are seeing in this world that might or might not be connected to cities, communities, and planning. Putting them into some boxes or drawers, there's societal trends, there's economic trends, there's different political trends, we have technological trends, and then obviously environmental trends. And I'm just going to click through some of these trends just to bring the whole thing into a planning perspective. And we talked about a lot of these trends already yesterday and today. Climate change, obviously, a big change happening and a big challenge for planners. On the one hand, we want to make sure to mitigate climate change. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we want to create sustainable communities. On the other hand, we know climate change is already happening. So we need to start, or we already started, adapting to climate change and creating resilient communities. And what does that mean for planning and the built world? Another trend, digitalization. Obviously, the entire world, every community, everything is digitalizing. And what does that mean for communities and cities? The classic example, the annual growth of sales in e-commerce versus retail sales, with the red lines being e-commerce. So this is a big development we're all aware of, but it also has major impacts on communities and cities and how we plan for them. But when we talk about digitalization, it's not just about the built world. It's also about the question, how can we make sure to avoid certain mistakes that we did in the past when planning communities in the real world? How can we avoid these mistakes in the digital world? Talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And how can we make sure that digital access is equitable and that the digital world is accessible for everyone. Another trend, and this is a graph from the Brookings Institute. Actually, Adi Tomer from Brookings gave a presentation on different developments and trends in the future to our board of directors this year in January. And so one other trend, demographic trend, the US is becoming more and more diverse, which is a great thing, but it is also a challenge for planners. And what this graph essentially tells us is that currently the majority of US population under 15 are minorities. And for the future, Brookings predicts that in 2045, the majority of the US population will be minorities. So now what does that mean for planning? What does that mean for communities and cities? And how can we prepare for that? Another trend, political trends. The trust in government is decreasing. The only government level that is having a momentum right now is the local government, which is where we planners are, and which is where we planners have the most effect of our work. What does that mean for the role of planning and the role of local governments in the future? And then there's a bunch of other technological and also societal trends. We read more and more about the momentum of the cars over. We are looking into sustainable ways of transportation, public transit, walking, biking. We're talking about scooters, all kinds of micromobility, shared mobility, and a complete change of the transportation sector. At the same time, when you look at certain trade shows and conferences like CES, there's new technologies coming up, and we don't know yet what they really mean to communities, the built environment, to cities. We talked about flying cars since the 1960s. So now talking about them again, we don't really know when is this really coming up, when is it really happening, but we need to prepare for it. And then Last but not least, artificial intelligence, probably everywhere today where you read newspapers or other types of media. What does it mean to us? There's a lot of urban applications with artificial intelligence that we are not even aware of, such as, for example, the simple navigation system that reroutes you around traffic. That's artificial intelligence right there. We just don't know about it. And the big question of what other urban applications are there? How is artificial intelligence changing the way our cities operate? But then for us at APA, also the question of, can AI do a planner's work? Can we put public interest in an algorithm? What is that going to mean for us? So now this is a good segue into the question of what is really the task of a planner. What do we do? And I'm using my two favorite quotes here. The first one by Charlie Hoke, a professor at UIC, who wrote the book, What Planners Do. And he says, planners compose and offer advice on preparing for an uncertain future. And then the second quote by Tim Keene, the planning director of the city of Atlanta, he said last year during our Big City Planning Directors Institute, planners help communities navigate change. So no pressure there for planners. At APA, our mission is to help and support planners in doing their work. We provide different types of guidance, toolkits, trainings, and trying to keep up with the changes in the world and making planning as successful as possible. So we want to get planners to be ready to face these challenges. Now, looking at an example with technological trends and technological innovation, there's really two levels we're looking here at. Technology is changing the communities and the built environment that we make plans for. At the same time, technology is changing the way we as planners do our work. When we look at technological trends, the issue here is really, and this is not a very scientific graphic, but I really like it because it says exactly what we face here. It's hard to adapt to the acceleration and the pace of change that we are noticing, or that we are living here with technological developments. And the question for us at APA is really, what can we do to make sure that planners are prepared for future trends, future technology in this case, not just as a reactive type of action, but actually be prepared once it's happening. The best example, obviously, when we look at how Uber or Airbnb spread across cities in the world, and all the planners were sitting there like not knowing what are we going to do. There were no policies, no regulations, nothing in place to actually address these challenges. So with that in mind, and with the mission of APA in mind, we realized we need to look much farther out in the future to be able to actually prepare planners for this world. And so for this reason, last year we started a foresight practice at APA. And the idea is really to look into the future, and the farther out you look, you see all kinds of different trends emerging. Some trends you might immediately see that they are connected to cities and planning. Sometimes some trends might not be that obvious. For example, in 2005, who would have thought the iPhone would be the big disruptor of cities? The invention of a telephone. No one saw that coming. So looking far out in the future means for us we need to watch and learn about a lot of trends that are happening, trying to make the connections to cities and the planning profession. We need to understand when is the time to start preparing for these trends, and then really being able to act once they're happening or even before. For our foresight practice, we're looking at 3 different levels, and those are making meaning of all these trends for the communities and city developments. The second level is for the planning profession. What does this mean for our work as planners? And the third level is, what does it mean for APA as an organization, as the ones who want to help planners to do their work? So staying with the technology trends, just a quick peek on what we are looking here. There's obviously different things that are happening when we look at level 1, how communities and cities are changing. Systems and infrastructure, the built environment is changing tremendously. Talking about trends like autonomous vehicles, for example. We don't know yet what the effect and impact will really be, depending on how autonomous vehicles are really going to be operated. Is everyone going to own their own car and still drive in their own car? Or is it going to be mobility as a service and a shared mobility with autonomous vehicles just circling around town? If the second scenario is going to happen, that's going to have huge impacts in terms of not just the fact that with autonomous vehicles, we can manage traffic more efficiently. We might need less space because cars can drive closer to each other. We might need less lanes, and there's a lot of obsolete space coming out of that. But then also with the idea of not needing parking anymore, because autonomous vehicles just circling around don't really need to park anymore. What is going to happen with all these parking spaces that we see in cities and surrounding places? So big changes might be happening here, and we're not really ready and we're not really prepared for it. At the same time, and that was just one example of the built environment, obviously there's other things. I talked about flying taxis and flying cars earlier. What does that mean for right-of-way, for property value, you name it. But then looking above or looking on the side, it's not just the built environment. There's also entire lifestyles in communities changing, and we are already experiencing that. We mentioned e-commerce earlier, telecommuting, travel habits are changing based on new technologies, and we really can see a trend from a shared society moving into an automated society. And what is that going to mean for us? Now, that having said, there is a trend in terms of the communities actually becoming real-time planners. Suddenly, we have this two-way communication streams between the local government and the planners and the communities. So it's not just us going out in the communities telling people what we're planning to do. Suddenly, it's the communities that are coming up with their own ideas, and co-creation is becoming more and more important. And then, last but not least, there's really 3 future scenarios that we are seeing right now for communities and cities. The one is humans in control, where we are today. Everyone is doing their own thing. Everyone owns their own thing. The second scenario is the private autonomy. In terms of transportation, it would be the example of everyone still owning their own car, but being autonomous vehicles. And then the third and most extreme scenario is the city on demand, or the shared city, where no one's owning anything and everything is automated, and that's the way we move around. So now, what does this mean for the planning profession? And you can see, obviously, there's many different aspects of the planning profession that are changing. One are the tools, and I would definitely also see pieces of geodesign in there. The way we collect data, the way we analyze data, the way we visualize data, as we saw today and yesterday. All of these things are changing. With artificial intelligence and the combination of location intelligence, suddenly we can create these digital twin cities, which takes planning to a completely new level. Also, the use of drones, that has a huge impact on the way we deal with disasters and disaster recovery. Suddenly we can get information in almost real time, and how do we do that? Obviously, when tools are changing, the skill sets have to change. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but obviously digital literacy is a big deal, and that needs to change in the planning profession. At the same time, when we talk about artificial intelligence and the possibility to put a lot of information or knowledge that's based on rationality, decision-making that's based on rationality into algorithms, soft skills will become more and more important. With that, also thinking of this acceleration of change and the pace of change, methodologies are changing. And we're really looking into a lot of things the IT industry is actually doing, probably also with the connection of smart cities and how we learn to do things differently. But it's really the question of, is a 10-year planning horizon still realistic? Or can we really create agile, comprehensive plans that allow us to adapt and be more agile to change? And then, as I already mentioned, we work with more and more with different disciplines. Planners have always been multidisciplinary, working with engineers, with architects, with landscape architects, you name it. But now IT plays a big role in the whole way of how we manage data and do our work. Now, what does this mean for geodesign? And I'm obviously not an expert in geodesign, but what we really see here is that that can be a good tool, a great tool to integrate in foresight processes, in prediction, and in how planners can become more agile in their work. And here's just a few bullet points as the result of a first brainstorm discussion on that, where we first of all obviously see the analysis of all these external forces of change and the potential impacts on communities. And how that can be done through geodesign. Also, really important, the assessment of the possibility, the probability, and the plausibility of certain trends. Only because something is a trend right now doesn't mean that it's really going to take off in the big way, as, for example, the iPhone took off and made a lot of different changes. In that sense of forecasting and looking into the future, scenario planning is becoming more and more important. And I'm talking about mainly exploratory and predictive scenario planning, talking about digital twin cities, and as I mentioned before, informing the foresight process by combining location intelligence with artificial intelligence. Another important point is understanding the interrelation between different forces. It's not just that there's one environmental trend and a technological trend and they don't have anything to do with each other. There's all kinds of interrelations, and we have to understand those too if we want to understand the future of our communities. And then, of course, the integration of predictions across different plans. We are currently working on a project together with the University of North Carolina and Texas A&M. Those two universities developed the Resilience Scorecard, which is a tool to essentially look into different hazards and how they can be integrated across plans. A hazards mitigation plan is one thing, but that information needs to be in the comprehensive plan and needs to be in all other plans. Otherwise, it's not going to help us anything. And then ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, understanding of what trends do we need to watch and learn about. How do we translate them into the planner's world, into cities and communities? What do we need to prepare for? And then what is already happening and needs to be acted on? And with that, we hope to be able to provide an agile and adaptive planning approach that helps us to address challenge of acceleration and uncertainty. Thank you.